From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I'm delighted to welcome you to the world premiere performance of Fierce Grace, Jeanette Rankin. Tonight, with Opera America, we present a song cycle honoring the life and career of this eminent and visionary figure. Rankin was the first woman elected to Congress, sworn into office 100 years ago this week. And this is a quote, "I may be the first woman member of Congress," she stated, "but I won't be the last." We know that's true, don't we? In a moment, I will introduce Mark Skoka, President and CEO of Opera America, to give us the background of how Fierce Grace came into being as an Opera America commission supported by Bank of America. This cycle was written by 4 acclaimed women composers: Kitty Brazelton, Laura Kaminsky, Laura Karpman, and Ellen Reid. Mark will be talking with Ms. Brazelton and Ms. Kaminsky and with the librettist, Kimberly Reed, following the performance. There'll be a short pause and then we'll have this discussion. Hope you're able to stay for that. Rankin was twice elected to Congress from the state of Montana, serving her first term during the First World War and the second a quarter of a century later. She was a committed pacifist, the only member of Congress to vote against America's entry into the Second World War. And then, at age 88, she would lead a women's march on Washington to protest the Vietnam War. In thinking about the connections between Jeanette Rankin and the library, and particularly the music division, we realize this event gives us the opportunity to bring out some rare and interesting items from our archives that evoke the period of her early career, to reflect her role as a strong leader of the women's suffrage movement. We've created a display of suffrage sheet music, including songs still incredibly relevant today. You can see them in the cases in our foyer outside these doors. I would like to acknowledge here some very special guests we have with us tonight. Jeanette Rankin's, part of Jeanette Rankin's family are here. Her nephew, Eric Rehovde. Eric is there. Yes. Her niece, Nora, who's for whom this extraordinary woman is a vibrant memory as well as an inspiration. And Julie Rehovde, the wife of their late brother Kent, and their daughters Kristen and Brooke. So we have a great nephew, a great niece, and 2 great nieces with us. Thank you for making this event so much more special by coming to celebrate it with us. This afternoon, we visited the library's manuscript division to see some letters and photographs preserved in our collection here. Let me leave you with a quote from a letter she wrote to Alice Blackwell in 1942. I quote, "We must never forget that in a democracy, individual integrity is the keystone upon which any victory for the people rests." And now, let me turn this evening over to Mark Skoka.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. What an honor to be here in Coolidge Auditorium at the Great Library of Congress. It's an Opera America event here in our former home, Washington, D.C., but it's a great pleasure to be back. Opera America is the umbrella organization for the opera industry. We provide services to artists, administrators, trustees, and opera lovers. We are a leading champion of American opera, having granted over $13 million in support of the creation and production of new work. We are dedicated to increasing diversity in opera, and our opera grants to female composers, part of which you're to see tonight, is a pillar of our effort. We have in the audience tonight a number of special guests: our board member Jim Feldman, a member of our Board of Overseers Jane Gross, a former board member Kathy French, Ann Meyer Baker and Georgiana Paul Schutz from the National Endowment for the Arts, Amy Fitterer from Dance USA, Mario Garcia Durham from Arts Presenters, and from the Opera America staff, our producer for this big event, Laura Lee Everett. Noah Stern Weber is in New York, but we thank him. Dan Cooperman, our Director of Government Affairs, and of course, our Director of Development and Membership, Dan Cooperman. So welcome all. Although we are based at the National Opera Center in New York, which we opened in 2012, many of our services and programs are available on our YouTube channel and at our website, operaamerica.org. In terms of this particular project, we had received generous support from Bank of America for 10 years, and we wanted to find a way to thank them. And at Opera America, when we thank people, we commission things. So we decided we would turn to the multiple winners of our opera grants for female composers program. There are two phases of that program: discovery grants, where we give support directly to individual artists to advance their work, and commissioning grants, where we support opera companies in commissioning operas from female composers. 4 women had won both discovery grants and commissioning grants. So we decided we would invite them to write a song as part of an unrelated, at the time, song cycle we would dedicate to Bank of America to thank them for their support. The wonderful librettist, Kimberly Reed, was brought on to do the libretto, and through discussion, the women decided to collaborate so that there was a unified story through the 4 different songs. So what you're hearing, of course, is this wonderful collaborative tribute to Jeanette Rankin and her history you've just heard about. It is somewhat coincidental but deeply stirring that she was sworn in as the first female congresswoman only 100 years ago, and exactly this week. But I wondered, because Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, who endowed this wonderful auditorium, did so in 1925, and I imagined perhaps their meeting and what that conversation might have been like in the 1920s. Did they know one another? We're delighted this evening that Laura Kaminsky, Kitty Brazelton, and Kimberly Reed are able to be with us for the performance, and I will be joining them for conversation after the performance of the song cycle. I wanted to read one quote from Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, and it was said in 1924. She wrote on October 23rd, it says, "Mrs. Coolidge wrote to the Librarian of Congress, Herbert Putnam, proposing a, quote, comprehensive plan toward establishing in our government a permanent musical influence," end quote. That was 1924, and let's hope that at the centenary of that statement in 2024, we still have cultural agencies. Whether we do or we don't, we will always have culture. And here to show us what great culture we are blessed with in this city, in this country, we have mezzo-soprano Heather Johnson and pianist Mila Henry to perform this song cycle. Enjoy.
You can do this. You can walk through that door into the house, that house full of men, the house of representatives. You can be the first woman ever elected to Congress. You know how to fight like you fought for suffrage in Montana and won. You know how to be strong. You sure as you can be strong enough to remove your hat. Face it! Nothing, not even a fancy hat, will distract them from your big nose. Suppose I should be proud. The other congressmen voted against my hat on the floor of the House. A vote on women's hats, another first, a millinery resolution, an honor to be considered more representative than woman. Equality, at least in hats. Forget the hat. You can do this. Let's make some real change here, Jeannette. Miss Rankin. Just don't let that phrase from the newspaper settle in. The lady from Montana should be the woman from Montana. Ladies, don't fight. Fight for women. Fight for suffrage. Fight for peace. capital switchboard. Hello, capital switchboard. Hello, hello, hello. This is Representative Jeanette Rankin. Yes, I'm back again. I must trouble you for some assistance. I'm in a telephone booth, stuck in a telephone booth. Outside the House of Representatives. No, the door's not stuck. I am trapped by a gang of reporters. hold on. There's a policeman. Officer, can you? Good. He's drunk. Well, campaign again. The world boys back from Vietnam.
Should have called you woman. Not lady, lady. You do assignment for women's studies? Who are you gonna thank? Who are you gonna thank? Who are you gonna thank?
I don't know either. I'll figure it out. Good luck. What was that statue I saw at the Capitol? That woman, the first. Who was that woman who was elected before women could vote? Who was that woman, the first? That woman who voted against World War I and took the blame. Brave woman who voted against World War II and took the blame. Even worse. That's her name. Jeanette Rankin. Jeanette Rankin.
The first vote ever cast by a woman was a vote for peace.
I thank her for that.
Epidemic of peace.
I thank her for that.
Habit of peace.
I thank you for that. Oh, weird phrase, thank you.
Where did that come from? Oh,
They come from things like song comes from sing. They comes from things like song comes from sing. I
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming librettist Kimberly Reed, Laura Kaminsky, and Kitty Brazelton, two of our composers. That was just wonderful. It's the first time I've heard the entire cycle performed live, and just how beautiful it is and how it hangs together. Heather and Mila, it was just wonderful. Indeed. This has quickly become one of my favorite projects, and if we could just adjust that, that would be great. So we set out to create a song cycle to thank Bank of America for 10 years of philanthropy. And we communicated with you, Laura Lee and Noah. How did you decide that you would do a project that was so unified instead of just 4 individual songs? Where did that unity get born?
Well, I mean, the first conversation we had was a conference call with me and Laura Lee and the 4 composers, and somehow the idea of an exquisite corpse came up. Does everybody know what an exquisite corpse is? When you, it's a drawing technique, kind of a game that was invented by the Surrealist artists. And if you can imagine this piece of paper was folded and then folded again and folded again, so that when you were drawing something, you only saw one panel of the paper, and you only drew on that panel of the paper without seeing what the other artists had drawn on the other panels. Then, when you unfolded everything, you would have like Kitty's drawing that continued into Laura's drawing, that continued into my drawing, and it would be very surreal. It was a surrealist drawing game. And somehow the idea came up that somebody suggested, and it really resonated with all of us, that we would like to stitch the piece together using this idea of the exquisite corpse. I have no idea why they call it an exquisite corpse, but hey, it's surrealism.
I get the exquisite part.
Yeah, well, the corpse part. So we came up with one phrase that would be repeated at the end of each of the songs. Mm-hmm. Kitty actually said that phrase, and the idea was that with the libretto, the text that would deliver each of the songs to that line, and the music, and each of the composers would try to end up in that same space, and hopefully it would give it this through line, and that through line, of course, is about Jeanette Rankin's peace activism, is about her tireless efforts to create an epidemic of peace, a habit of peace, as she liked to say. And hopefully that process of passing on a twig or two of laurel for those who must come after, to continue the habit of peace, was going to be the thing that stitched everything together. And I've talked enough on these people.
Laura?
But the thing that we didn't talk about was how we ended up with Jeanette Rankin, because that wasn't a given. In fact, at the very beginning of our conversations, we started out with Joan of Arc as a strong woman and a historic figure, and then it was, well, Joan of Arc's so dead. What could we do to make this more about contemporary world that we live in? And so then there was a conversation about, well, sort of a lineage of Joan of Arc-like people, or contemporary people commenting on Joan of Arc. And so we circled around, and then Kim is from Montana. So she came up with this notion of, well, have you guys heard about Jeanette Rankin? And of course, we all stupidly said, of course we don't know who you're talking about. And she gave us the history, and it was so absolutely the perfect person that all 4 of us immediately said, yes, we all want to take this on. But I think what was so brilliant in your conception was that you took us on a journey with her, mm-hmm. from her very beginning to the end of her life, and it really lets us think about this continual seeking peace.
You really do feel the journey, the century that is spanned in the song cycle, and we are left with such a sense of the fact that we build on those who came before us and have a responsibility to pave the way for those who will come after. That sense of continuity is built beautifully into the piece. How did you decide who would do which part of it? Kitty, how did you get your song? Did you draw straws?
No. I don't know how that happened.
It was randomly generated. I put four numbers in
Really?
in a hat and plucked them out. It was random.
Into Jeanette's hat.
Into Jeanette's hat. In keeping with the exquisite corpse random generation idea. Yeah.
So it's really random.
When we chose the melody, how did we do that? Did we do that the exquisite corpse way?
You had that idea, or somebody had the idea, it may not have been you, to find something that would link all of them. And it came up, well, what if there was a line that we could all share? And about an hour later, you sent me and Laura, the other Laura and Ellen, that line. And so you just got inspired and set that line of text and sent us the music. It was like, okay, we're going to work with that one and weave it together, and it just became the twig or the thread.
I remember where I wrote it, and some of my students are here from that classroom. I was between classes, and I said, okay, I'm writing this. And I wrote it and sent it out to these 4 other august women, and I was just terrified, like, why am I doing this? She's like, okay, I hope you like it.
During the composition process, were you curious about what the others are writing? Were you just focused on, okay, I'm writing my song and I know there will be this line in it that we share? Was it a completely independent creative process? Laura?
Well, I think the answer is yes, other than we had this one line of text. So I know all of the 3 colleagues who participated in this. So I made a point of, looking at some of their music just to sort of enter into their worlds, to kind of keep me true to my world. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing. But the other thing that I did was I analyzed not just my song's text, but the entire cycle's text, because having worked with Kim before, I sort of know how she thinks a little bit and how she uses language, and I knew that there would be hidden connectors from one song to the other. Turns of phrase, a word, an image, a rhythm in the language. So I wanted to see those, because then I would guess, based on who had which other text, how they might approach those where they would be relevant for my song, because I did want us to feel like we were organically a whole. And that was, I think, probably for all of us the scariest thing, was this going to sound like 4 fragments around this beautiful person from history, or was there going to be this one arc that emerged? So I think that was the scariest part for me.
And how did it work for you? I mean, here was one story you told about Jeanette Rankin with a century of chronology. Does it hold together musically for you as you listen to the story?
It really does, and I think in large part because of this base of agreement that we had as our starting point, these common threads, this common musical phrase, and to a certain extent, it warrants a different treatment by these 4 different composers, because the expression is there's no such thing as a second act in American Life, right? I think it was, but she really had at least 3 different acts. I mean, she was the elected, and her very first vote was against World War I. She kind of spent a couple of decades in the wilderness and then was reelected. One of her first votes was against World War II. Spent another couple decades in the wilderness again, traveling around India mostly at that point, and then was kind of resuscitated for a 3rd act when she was adopted by anti-war protesters during during the late 60s against the Vietnam War. So these three different chapters really, and then kind of a present-day chapter, really lent themselves to
a kind of
three different
difference,
treatments.
yeah,
So it was kind of planned for those different segments.
But that's part of what was scary, Kim. That was the each part, each story, and I'm sure you felt this. It was so huge. It was a giant story in itself. And Heather sewed all this together in front of you tonight.
Yes.
I'm just breathless. Thank you.
So, this is the first time you've done a project like this. You are all working on your own wonderful projects right now. Do you think that this is a good exercise? Should other composers engage in this kind of work to have a kind of higher level of collaboration in a song cycle? Is this something you would do again, Kitty?
Wow. I should talk into the mic, excuse me. I would be scared. I'm scared. I've been scared this whole time. I was scared over there. I'm scared. I love collaboration. It's a big part of my life and my teaching and everything I do. But it's a tough thing to do. And this was a big, big project. There's nothing small about what you just heard.
I know that we made a CD of this a couple of months ago, and there have been some adjustments to the scores since that recording. That was kind of the first proof off the printing press, and then everyone got a chance to make some adjustments. Did you make any adjustments to text from the CD, or is the text all the same?
Text is the same.
What changes did you make in the music, Kitty?
I've done 14 revisions.
Really?
With the last with Mila's help, and was turned in just 2 weeks ago. Yeah. Kim and I have gone back and forth. We've had a very healthy dialogue, and I wanted to get things, make it easier for me and have it be smaller, and you held my feet to the fire. And so it was a question of how to do that.
Mm-hmm. And Laura, how about you? Adjustments musically?
There weren't that many. There were one or two words that in the recording session it was asked to change the order of 2 pitches because it landed better. I mean, nothing significant. Mm-hmm. More changes were really made in the piano part. And Mila, I realized in the editing of the recording that there are a few things that I didn't hear. And I wasn't sure that I heard them when we did the recording. And I asked Mila, and she said, well, it's kind of awkward. And I looked at it, and I said, you know, you're absolutely right. Let's just get rid of these things. So we cut out about, 4 or 5 chords? And then just the very end. There was an original ending, and then Kim and I had a dialogue, and you made a request to make a shift in how the piano part ended, and I changed it, and that, when we rehearsed it for the recording, it was like, you know what? It didn't work as well, and went back to the original. So the recording and this performance lined up, but that was in the recording process that we made that change in the studio in one day. It was pretty exciting, on the spot. You're amazing.
At the culmination of this project, hearing the song cycle performed in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., what lessons from Jeanette Rankin, learning about her life, learning about her determination, her consistency over time, what lessons do you derive from Jeanette Rankin for today? Kim?
Wow, that's a huge question. I will try to keep it short. 2 days ago was the 100th anniversary of her first vote. Yesterday, we had some pretty significant military action. And I think that from what I can gather, if Jeanette were around today, I think that she would challenge us to not have our very first knee-jerk reaction to violence, to be more violence. If people die, why is our first reaction to create more death? And I know that there's a lot of healthy discussion that needs to happen around all of those, and you can come from a lot of different sides. And Jeannette actually, from what I understand, was careful to distinguish between her work for peace and being a pacifist, meaning that it was completely impossible to ever, take any sort of military action. But I think that when I'm going to get a little bit political here. When we have leaders who are not comfortable unless they're fighting, I think that's the biggest lesson that I took from Jeannette. That why does this have to be our first reaction? Why do we have this habit of antagonism and of fighting, and that's our first reaction when we could develop a habit of peace?
Laura, what did you learn and take away from this about Jeannette in your own life?
Well, I think I would echo everything that Kim just said, but I think what I'll do is I'll bring it to today. When I arrived this afternoon, my hotel is exactly 3 miles from here, and I decided, since my song was about a march, that I would walk here and really be in Washington, D.C. And the last time I did that was the day after the inauguration, where there were not 10,000 boots, but there were 200,000 boots or whatever. I mean, amazing number of boots. And what I really was thinking as I did the walk, and it was a beautifully overcast day, and so all of these gleaming buildings had that cast from the cloud formations, and I thought, think of all the people who have walked across this city to speak about how they want this society to work and work better, and her courage to do it, and it continues. And I've come here for many a march in my day, and I just thought how fragile and beautiful the tradition is, but we have to keep our boots on the ground in the good way. Mm-hmm. So that's what I took from it today.
Kitty?
I think what everyone else has said is very elegant, and mine is not so elegant. It's more in the small. I think I learned from Jeannette that you can win with quiet, you can win with peace. Some of us who are women have been in situations of physical oppression. My song was that. Not such nice situations. And it seemed that even I felt like I participated in the situation by thinking that as a woman I was weaker physically and I couldn't fight back. And I think there's a choice whether to be a victim. Always a choice, even if someone is stronger than you. And I'm talking small personal situations. But I think they also have echo in the large. You can carry peace inside, and that can win, and you have to believe that, and she kept believing that.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is an illustration that art matters. It has been such an honor to be here at the Library of Congress at this important time and the century mark for Jeanette Rankin. I'm sorry that Laura Karpman and Ellen Reid couldn't be with us because they are equally brilliant, dynamic composers, equally brilliant, dynamic women. It would have been an amazing conversation, still more, had they been with us. So we send them our best regards. We thank them for their contribution to this song cycle. Again, Heather and Mila, thank you for a wonderful performance. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Really a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.